NATO simply shocked Ukrainians today. There is no unity in the North Atlantic Alliance regarding what the Russian drone incursion into Poland actually was. There is strong evidence this incident was accidental, not a deliberate act by the Russian Federation. This is the current position in NATO corridors. NATO now admits the drones that entered Poland on September 10 may have done so accidentally or due to Ukrainian electronic warfare. Paradoxically, the same idea was voiced the day before by American President Donald Trump. But, without waiting for this story to develop, I want to immediately point out a few very important points. The Polish Prime Minister, the Polish Foreign Minister, and the German Defense Minister all stated in unison that this was deliberate, and that drones neutralized by electronic warfare don't actually fly along such a trajectory. Let me remind you, one drone flew 300 kilometers across the Brest region of Belarus, maneuvering within its territory, which indicates that it was still following a certain course and wasn't confused or thrown off. Well, I'm not even mentioning the additional fuel tanks that were installed on the drones to increase their flight range. But let's set emotions aside and figure out why NATO started talking in this tone at all, and whether this is actually their official position. Because right now many news outlets are spreading this story in exactly this way. They're saying that NATO has accused Poland, or rather Ukraine, of attacking Poland. But let's calmly look at the facts and analyze this whole situation. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is September 19th. And before we start this episode, I want to share with you an interesting YouTube channel where I personally, so to speak, relax and calm my nerves after being overwhelmed by the news. Well, with the kind of news, for example, that we are going to discuss with you today, I recommend the YouTube channel of Olha Babira. She is a psychologist, and there are short videos by a psychologist about anxiety, boundaries, relationships, and very importantly, productivity, and also about how not to burn out. These are short episodes in simple, clear language. Basically, each video is one clear, understandable step toward that very clarity. The secret perfects the greater. I want to tell you about it. To be cut on the children's Wi-Fi charts is still care, even if it has been irrelevant until now, okay. The active piloting was intentional, which some other European countries also agree with, but not in public. High-ranking military officers, intelligence officials, diplomats, and politicians from NATO countries admit that things are far from straightforward. They say it doesn't mean it wasn't dangerous. Undoubtedly, something has changed in the way the Kremlin thinks about its risk tolerance when targeting Ukraine. But, as Cable News Network reports, citing Western NATO intelligence officers, the available data on the Polish incident is ambiguous for interpretation. And now, an unnamed United States military official working in Europe has assessed the likelihood of a deliberate attack as 50-50. According to an unnamed senior representative of one of the Western intelligence agencies, the flight pattern of the drones indicates that they went off course and were simply trying to recover. And here, there's an immediate inconsistency in the statements of Western officials. Because that same United States official goes on to say that the absence of explosives on Russian drones can be interpreted as Russia's desire to probe Polish air defenses without risking a harsh response. So does that mean the drone actually flew over Poland, or what? But, this official says, it should be taken into account that Russia also launches many empty drones over Ukraine, whose purpose is to distract Ukrainian air defenses. Meanwhile, explosive-laden drones are heading for their targets. A large number of drones that entered Poland can hardly be considered proof of intentional actions either, this official says. After all, it was just a small fraction of the hundreds of drones that Russia launched at Ukraine that same night. Well, and then they'll give a quote from Cable News Network. A senior Western intelligence official told Cable News Network that they lean toward the assessment that the incident was unintentional, even as they condemn it as a troubling sign that the Kremlin has become more reckless. A United States source familiar with the intelligence agreed with this statement. However, another United States military official and a United States congressional official On the contrary, I believe Russian drones appeared in Poland on purpose. At the same time, the German newspaper Deutsche Welle reports the position of a high-ranking source in the alliance. They have their own source and write the following. Most likely, the drones intentionally violated NATO airspace. This was a test of our red lines. At the same time, the alliance does not classify the incident as an attack, since many of the drones were unarmed. Nevertheless, the Polish side recorded the scale. At least 19 entered airspace. Drones and the interceptions continued all night. Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland, publicly stated that the last drone incursion was around 6:30 in the morning. Well, some of the drones were coming specifically from the Belarusian direction, and, as he said at the time, the operation lasted all night. The next escalation was prompted by the September 16 incident when the same Polish Prime Minister made this statement. The State Security Service neutralized UAVs flying over Parkova Street and the Belvedere. 2 citizens of Belarus have been detained. That means this is already the center of Warsaw and the residence of the President of Poland. The European press is noting 2 more angles on this topic. The first part of the drones is to serve a diversion or reconnaissance function. And the second, according to NATO military assessments, is that the scenario looks like a test of reaction time. The time it takes to scramble F-16S and F-35S, the operation of airborne warning and control system, and the time to activate and respond. Patriot. In short, NATO is working out protocols in case this happens again. There were also cautious suggestions that Ukrainian electronic warfare affected some drone routes. The formula from as carefully as possible. Electronic warfare effects in combat zones are unpredictable. But more importantly, not a single official NATO spokesperson, I repeat, not a single official NATO spokesperson said that Ukraine did this. There was only a cable news network source and a Deutsche Welle source in the alliance who said that, well, all of this can be interpreted in different ways. This is very important. There was no official position. Therefore, I state that the point of NATO's wording is to shift the responsibility, but to keep room for a decision that actually reduces the risk of a repeat, to move the interception of targets further east, that is, into the skies over Ukraine. That's exactly how the Poles put it, very gently suggesting they'd prefer it was a mistake, but it's not. This is a test, and the response should be systematic. For Brussels, this means combining 3 elements. This is the overall picture of the air situation from airborne warning and control system plus ground radars in Poland, Romania and Slovakia. Coalition fighter jets on standby and clear rules of engagement to strike Shaheds, any Russian drones and cruise missiles over western Ukraine. As long as the trajectory is clear and the risk of debris is minimal. This logic is now being stated publicly and not just by Kyiv against the backdrop of the so-called, as they say, Warsaw incident. Le Monde writes that a group of Western experts has directly outlined the idea of closing the western skies of Ukraine with roughly 120 aircraft because Russian air defenses and fighters won't go there. Politically, this again looks like a compromise between the no-fly zone model of 2022 and the current one. We intercept those drones that already reach NATO territory. That's too late, so we need some kind of solution in the middle, which is to close the skies over western Ukraine. Now about Ukrainian electronic warfare, this version comes up in briefings. Because any major route in the war now has grey factors. Global positioning system jamming, fake beacons, changing the route in flight and so on. But even if you hypothetically assume that some interference diverted the trajectory of several drones, that doesn't remove the original responsibility. Who exactly launched these drones and why? The empty dummy drones were actually heading towards Rzeszów and further west. Why did they go there? Warsaw's stance is clear. This tested NATO's strength. Since the alliance calls this a provocation, not an attack, the response shouldn't be condemnation. But we intercept them sooner, over western Ukraine. Conclusion. No, NATO is still not blaming Ukraine, not shifting the blame. That's a very strong statement. The alliance played it safe with their wording, not calling the incident an attack, and they're discussing how to move the interception of threats further east, where they can actually protect both Poland and Ukraine. For Moscow, this is bad news. The louder these empty drones test NATO's nerves, the closer a political decision comes regarding a Western shield over Ukraine. For Kyiv, this is a window of opportunity, a reason to say, intercept them here so you don't have to catch them over Ukraine. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.